So, John, I don't think you met Eddie until working in the WWF. Like when he comes over from WCW, that's probably the first time you meet him. But you knew his family from way back when, right?
Yeah. I knew his family, and of course, grew up in West Texas, so I knew of the Guerrero family also very well. I met Hector later. We were working both for Crockett when Crockett tried to open up Texas, and he loved Hector for very good reason. Hector is an unbelievably talented guy. We talk about our podcast. We had Hector on our show. There's not a Guerrero that's not a good guy. Guerreros are just fun people. They love life. Mondo, by the way, named after the riot that Gory got in Mexico City. So these guys have got incredible wrestling history, but they're all just fun guys. You know, when I used to see a brawl break out on Raw, I go, looks like a Guerrero family reunion, and that's pretty much what it was. They are fun people, but they love to get rowdy.
I know you spent a little time with Hector, and I don't know that some of our younger fans may realize this, but it's clear that Eddie drew inspiration from some of Hector's old promos back in the day, right?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Hector was a great promo. Chavo, drew massive money. I know you're talking about Hector, but Chavo drew massive money back in the Coliseum. Chavo was a huge star. There's stories about Chavo and Frank Sinatra going out together. I mean, Chavo was the man back in the day. And then Hector was just like that. Not as much in the Coliseum. By the way, Chavo and Roddy Piper in the Coliseum when Piper was just barely a teenager turning 20 were drawing huge sellouts back in the day. And Hector, it was much the same. I mean, like I say, there's not a Guerrero that couldn't work. And Hector was somebody that Eddie modeled himself after because Eddie was by far the youngest guy. When you talk about Chavo, Chavo was almost, the age of Eddie's uncle. Chavo Jr. is almost more Eddie's age because there's such a difference in the boys, how they were born under Gory.
I know that a lot of people probably don't put two and two together, but you and Eddie actually had similar routes into getting to big-time professional wrestling. You both start in Texas. You're both going to work in Mexico. You're both going to work in Japan. You're going to add some stops in Europe. Back in those days, why was getting that international exposure important to your progression as a performer, do you think?
It was two things. One, you had to make money, and we couldn't make money. The territories were dying then, and you couldn't really make money in many territories in the States, so you had to go overseas. The only money I was making that was decent was in Mexico and in Japan, and then later when I got the job in Europe, that was the best job I'd ever had before the WWE job. So you had to go overseas to make money, but we also knew an educational background was important. To get over in one territory, which is hard, by the way, and if you can get over one territory, generally you can get over in another. It's hard to get over. But we could go from territory to territory, and everyone was different. Memphis was different from Texas. Dallas was different from Amarillo. They're all different from Florida. Everything, the difference of the Carolinas with the fast moving and the tag teams, every territory was different. So it was an educational experience. By the time you got to WWE, most guys had 500 to 1,500 matches and had been champions somewhere, kind of like college football. Everybody that comes in to play college football has been a star of a high school somewhere. But to get that educational experience, you had to go to a lot of different places, which is what's so hard today for these young kids starting out in wrestling. I don't see how you can go straight to television. I don't see how The Miz went straight to global television and still made a Hall of Fame career. That's incredible. I'm not sure that I could have done that or any guys I broke in could have done that. These guys now, when they come, they're really at a disadvantage because they didn't have that background that we had. And a lot of that was just you had to go where the work was.
How much of Eddie's work had you seen before he joined the company? Because I know you're traveling all the time and wrestling yourself. So the last thing you want to do, I'm sure, when you get home with the wife or the girlfriend is, hey, let's watch some more other wrestling. I get that. But did you see any at all?
Yeah, I saw some, but not much. I mean, for one thing, there's nothing Eddie did that I could do. So it wasn't like I needed to watch his matches because I was trying to poach something or learn how to work. Right. He was incredible. I saw him in WCW mainly. I saw a little bit of stuff from Mexico, but mainly in WCW when Eric brought out the cruiserweights, which were just phenomenal matches back then. And, Eddie was part of that. And so we got to watch a lot of that. It was so much fun to watch. And so I did see some of it. But again, we worked every night. And so it wasn't like we didn't want to watch other programs. I didn't see ECW basically until I showed up at ECW Arena in 2004, 2005.
Let's talk a little bit about the Radicals jumping over. That's a big jump in early 2000. It's Chris Benoit, it's Dean Malenko, it's Perry Saturn, and of course it's Eddie Guerrero. You were there at the time. Like when you hear that hey, there's 4 guys as a group coming over from WCW. How do you remember receiving that news? How was that received by the boys in the locker room?
The boys loved it. There wasn't the competition between WWE and WCW was more between the higher ups, and because that was a 0-sum game for those guys. Eric Bischoff, I know he kind of says that he wasn't wanting to put Vince out of business, but I think that was probably the case. I think you knew when you went head to head with him that one guy was going to go out of business and one guy was not. So I'm sure that animosity between the top guys who were done, if whoever loses, was real. It wasn't between the boys. And so when we saw those guys coming over, we thought, man, this is fantastic. We've got some incredible talent coming. Those 4 guys were incredible talent. 2 of the guys went on to become champions and headline WrestleMania. We knew how good they were, and we knew how exciting it was, an influx of talent into our roster. And when you do something like that, you basically just line up and think, how can I work with these guys? Because they're going to get a huge push, and you want that rub from working with them.
From a camaraderie standpoint, when a group comes in like that, does anything change? Like who rides with who, or the clique? Not the actual clique with Shawn Michaels and Kevin Nash. I'm just saying, I know there are groups of guys who are friends in real life. Does that dynamic change when you get this many new guys at one time?
Not with those guys. Those guys were different. I mean, those guys are some of the most liked guys in the history of the business. I know there's Chris Benoit fell off the deep end and did some horrific things, but Chris was back then was just considered a good guy. Eddie Guerrero, people loved Eddie, and Perry and Dean were the same. Those guys fit in incredibly well. So it wasn't like you brought guys in that were standoffish or were divas. They weren't. They were guys who fit in really well. Now, different guys that came in over the years, you can add a little element to it. It kind of upsets the dressing room a little bit, but not with those guys.
I've always been fascinating, just the unspoken rules of wrestling. Like I know once upon a time you went around and you introduced yourself to everybody and you shook their hands and all that. Was wrestler etiquette like that in place in January of 2000, as best you can recall?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I don't know when it changed. I think it's changed now because I don't see that in the buildings, which is fine. That was our tradition, and that was how we did it. And they do it differently now, and they're drawing huge crowds, so they're doing something right. But yeah, 100% that was when you go into any place. The first thing, especially if you're a new person, you go in the restroom, around the dressing room, say hi to everybody and introduce yourself to people that you don't. I still do that to this day, no matter what room I'm in.
When do you think the wrestler handshake went away? I mean, like the limp dead fish handshake, when did that go away?
In the mid-90s. In the mid-90s. I remember, man, people used to, God almighty, that was the worst thing ever. I mean, the worst thing ever. Guys that come up, they have that little limp noodle handshake with you. They want to show you're a worker. Look at the guy's forehead. You can tell he's a worker or not. You don't need him shaking your hand with some limp noodle. I tell you this, if you tried that with Vince McMahon, he might fire you. I mean, seriously, there's been times where I've shaken hands with Vince, and Vince always had a firm handshake, and I just missed his hand a little bit, and he goes, let's try that again. And literally, we'd do it again. Vince hated that working handshake. Nobody did that with Vince. And so I don't know if that's part of what's killed it, but a lot of the guys later just thought this is one of the dumbest things ever, this stupid handshake we're doing. You felt like an idiot doing it, especially when you do it in public. People look at you like 2 big guys shaking hands, with this limp noodle way. I thought it was awful, and I'm glad it's gone. But that started disappearing in the mid-90s. Older guys, especially guys who didn't make it, would tell you, I could always tell a worker by how they shake hands. So I'd always shake hands as stiff as I could with them, just to let them know that I didn't play. And everybody would. I mean, those guys, there were some idiots there's some people that still do it.